Good afternoon everybody. I wanted to make a quick video about ways of developing dynamics in scales and arpeggios. I hope to have three practical things you could do that could help you with that. The first thing we need to understand as a basic fundamental is how we produce loud and soft sounds on the piano. Basically, we need to realize that the hammer is thrown towards the string, and the energy with which it hits the string affects the dynamic. So if it has very small kinetic energy or energy, that is all created by the velocity, the speed at which the hammer hits the strings, at which the hammer is thrown towards the string, hits it and bounces off. And because this is a throwing mechanism, the keyboard, it means that the velocity that the key moves is what affects the speed of the hammer, affects the dynamic. So if our key goes down very slowly, the hammer is, yes, it's just lifting a bit to the escapement, then it drops down. It doesn't have enough velocity to get to the string. If it goes down a little faster, it just has enough velocity to hit the string, bounce off. If it goes faster still, and here I'm having to sense this within the 10.5 millimeters or 10 millimeters of key descent. And if it goes very fast, it has a lot more energy. So it's really a throwing mechanism. It's like throwing a ball at a wall or something like that. And you can demonstrate this, for example, if I was to throw something at that window, and I just happen to have a stuffed toy here, an Australian endangered animal. Actually, it's only a toy of. I would never really throw this at anything. But if I were to throw it at the window fast, it would bounce back. If I were to throw it very slow, it obviously doesn't have enough velocity to get there. And if I were to throw it at a medium speed, it sort of just touches it. So it's really like it's the velocity you need to deal with. You're throwing the hammer at the key. So what's the point of that? I think the point of that is this idea of pushing. And sometimes if you ask people, how do I make a loud sound? I really push on the key, push harder or hit harder. If I push like that, all I'm doing is obviously tensing myself up. So we tend to try to avoid the words of pushing. Even if I push like that and then hold hard, it just tenses everything up and is not very helpful. Also, the keyboard feels very hard. Pushing or pressing, harder or softer, I don't think are useful. We want to try and think of velocity or speed. So that leads us to different ideas for touch, and I'll just touch on them very briefly, but there are many different ideas for touch. Perhaps another video or a presentation about that would be quite useful. So we're throwing a hammer, we're throwing the key and making the hammer bounce off the string. We could think of throwing the key off the key bed, which of course it would be a bit like staccato. You could think of bouncing the key down off the key bed. You know, of course, if you let it go, it will come back up. Some people use a ball to sort of like bounce like that. I tend to use teddy bears or something like this little animal. Maybe the teddy will work well if I can make him bounce off the keys. He doesn't bounce very well, so throw him away. What about this guy? So he's sort of bouncing. And I could, if he was a ball in my hand, I could somehow have that feeling like if I was bouncing a ball on the ground like that. Another idea is the idea of, instead of thinking of going down, is to think of picking up, picking up the sound into the palm of your hand, something like, or. This is helping me use these muscles here, not those ones, tendons that do that, but the muscles there, and I'm imagining picking up those notes into the palm of my hand. It sort of makes your fingers quite curved. Again, some people actually put things in the palm of their hand. I've lost my animals, but you could have a little animal that goes into the palm of your hand. You can pick that up. And some people like put an eraser on the key and try and pick it up. Another idea is making sure that you can practice your different velocities of striking with all the fingers helping where possible, and the thumb moving from the root of the thumb, or in my left hand, and then consciously releasing the tension there, consciously not pushing or not pressing. So I might be doing that by having my arm float. I might be doing that by the usual thing we might do. A phrasing movement that's a release. Or we might be doing it just by feeling that we're not pushing down, by sliding along like that. We can also use with the other touches I talked about in another video where we're moving the finger towards us in the legato video. Again, the idea of feeling what the touch is like after I've played the note. Is it like that, or is it more yielding? I can sort of feel that. I can also do that with this touch we talked about there, which was this flicking away one. Or I can then feel the touch. In trying to develop this sensitive touch in all dynamics, one idea that people sometimes talk about is the idea that the key wants to return to its natural rest position. Once the key is down, it wants to push back up because of the balances in there. That's a very small force that comes back up, but it is possible to think about, can we feel that after we've played a note? So I play this note, can I actually feel that key wanting to come back up? If it does come back up, the sound will cease. If I can just sense it just starting to want to come up, my hand, provided I have a good posture, my hand and arm are fairly floating and sensitive, and I can feel a sensitive touch. So sometimes it's worth having somebody put their hand on the piano, or do it on a white note here, to maybe play it, put the note down silently, and then just feel how much is that key wanting to come back up. Because if you can feel that there, wanting to push back up, you've got a sensitive touch and you can control the dynamics. Okay, anyway, there's some different ideas about touches. What we really want to look about here is 3 practical ways that you can perhaps develop some dynamics in your scales. Excuse me. The obvious one is comparing the dynamics. So for example, if you were just to take a single note on, say, 3rd finger, because it's very easy, and to play piano, and then compare it with forte, and it would be good to play a long note. Then you could expand that. You could have piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and forte. Then you could expand it perhaps to the 6 levels of dynamics pianissimo. Let's do it with a different one. Let's do it something difficult. No, with a 5th finger on a black note. Oh, that's very hard. Okay, so, and we'll do it here. Pianissimo. Piano. Mezzo piano. Mezzo forte. Forte. Fortissimo. They were different. In that case, you can hear, you can hear the different things, and you actually have to imagine them quite well in your head before you do them. So you could do that with chords. You could do that with, as I did then, notes that are from on the keys, which is easy. You could also do it with notes coming from above. Those who've studied or had classes with the Italian pianist Lydia Baldecchi-Arcuri would know the arm descent technique, where she was teaching people to start with the whole arm descent. Let's do a C with a thumb. Let's do those levels. That was supposed to be pianissimo, but it was so uncontrolled, it didn't sound at all. Piano. Mezzo piano. You can see I'm not really controlled. I'm slightly louder than I want to be. Mezzo forte. Forte. Fortissimo. That's actually really tricky because you're controlling the whole arm descent, and the idea then is your different touches are just using part of that. You might descend down from above, something like that. So you can make this scale of dynamics and work at that. Very useful ear cleaning exercise, imagination exercise, and technique exercise, just to sort of start off. The other one is a way of playing which I heard a young pianist in Malaysia some years ago, fantastic pianist, talk about in a masterclass, invisible playing, and that would be this. My B major scale invisible. It's actually interesting because you can hear the hammers, not the hammers, the dampers just coming off the string and making that sound. Basically, I'm playing so slow, the key descent so slow and controlled, that I can feel the key go down, but it's not sounding. So again, the hammer does not have the velocity to hit the string. Difficult to do. Fast. Possible. And then you can just let it a little bit more speed or a slightly deeper touch, and it's then piano. Of course, this is used a lot in balancing things. If we want to balance a melody with a bass or something within one hand, if we wanted to make a melody, what would it be? Something like, and we wanted to have that exercise where that one is very soft, so an accompaniment, or I could exaggerate and play the detached one invisible. I wonder if I can do that. It's really hard. So if you're trying to voice a chord or something, sort of, you know, sort of, or if you were trying to do one of those exercises where you could have, well, that's really hard. This one is going to be played and they're going to be invisible. Didn't work. Anyway, you can use that in all sorts of ways. So that would work on your very soft dynamic. And the last practical method I'd like to show you is something from Max Cook many years ago called the Jackhammer method. Jackhammer is that thing that's used to break up concrete on the road or something. The idea, I'll just show you what it would look like. So I'm going to play what a B major scale using the Jackhammer method. Basically, I'm again throwing my arm, I'm using the whole arm, so I better have a good posture. That one didn't work. I'm throwing my hand at the note with one arm, big phrasing movement going forward, and two notes are coming out. So it's like when you throw a stone and it bounces along the water, or you throw a ball and it bounce, 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 bounce. I'm sort of bouncing along the key. And you might need to think about bounce, 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 where you're moving in the key. If I try 3, it wasn't so good, but it worked. I might need to think about moving along there, or I might need to think about dividing this movement into 3 different things. The first one probably more, and the last 2 slightly less, because it's going to be strong note. And then I'm singing. And then the next one. Bad. Difficult to do in anything other than the middle of the hand. And from this angle, your arm needs to be really behind the note, so you're really going away from you like that. Hands, fingers must all be helping each other. We don't want to be open like that. I would start with 2, or you could start with 1. Feel the next note, and I'm doing it from on the keys. 2 notes. I can also think of picking up 3 notes. Not good. 4 notes. Difficult. Really having to think, moving along 4 spots. That worked well. Middle of the finger, 3rd finger, easy. Not bad. Wrong note, but Okay. Too high up above the keys. That was good, it was on the keys. And after I do that, it becomes easy to play like that. So that's throw one impulse and a number of notes coming out. If your arm is very tense, and excuse me because the camera will probably chop my head off, you can do this playing standing up, finding a suitable height, and it didn't work. Gotta make my arm float. This is particularly good because that was an accidental 3. If I do that and then sit down, sitting down becomes easier. Try 3. Ah, bad. I can also practice slow. Good, better. Getting behind. It's all about the setup. 3. Really behind here. Finding it's working better if I have the sort of soft pad on my finger, but that was good actually, and it feels straight. Not so good. And with a good grand piano I can actually, oh, I was going to say I could start in the key. Then when I sit down to do it, tell I really haven't got the touch of this piano. How does that relate to then playing it fast? Good question. Somehow it has made your arm loose, it's made your fingers very close, and you're used to playing a number of notes in a number of movements. And that becomes easy. So that's the jackhammer method of doing that. When you are putting your dynamics into your scales, it's very important that I think that you compare the dynamics. So if you're practicing some weird scale and you really want to just compare your piano and your forte, you know. Soft, one hand loud, the other hand soft, and vice versa. So that's important to do that. Again, setting it up so that you're ready to do that before you do any fancy long big scales and great speed, I think. Then the last thing is, if you had to do scales with crescendo and diminuendo, usually 4 octave ones, I think a good little sneaky trick is to play the first octave piano, then do the crescendo over the next 2 octaves, and the last octave, forte coming down, forte, diminuendo. So you've got piano, crescendo for 2 octaves, forte, coming down forte, do that. So your crescendo and diminuendo is happening over those 2 octaves. Okay, so that's a very quick, rough video about some ways of developing or some ideas about dynamics in scales and arpeggios. We looked at the idea that the hammer is thrown towards the string and it's really key velocity that is the thing you're trying to change. So you're just trying to change the key velocity in this small 10 millimeters, or if you're doing a big stroke from above. And of course that's going to mean you need to not be tense, you need to be able to release and have a sort of musical gesture. Some very quick ideas about touch, we might look at those later on. Obviously these are things you can't really be thinking about each note when you're playing a whole complicated musical phrase. They're things to think about in technical work, in exercises, in scales, when you're just down at the thing of playing one note or small numbers of notes. The different sorts of touch, bouncing off the keyboard, picking up the notes into the palm of your hand. Here's the note, please have that D sharp or E flat. Striking and consciously releasing by testing, using these different touches that way, and the idea that the key wants to push back up, and if you can play a note, picking it up and feel that wanting to push back up, when it does push back up, the note will, the sound will finish. When it doesn't, you're just sort of controlling and feeling that touch. Then the 3 practical things you can do for your dynamics is have some exercise where you clear out your ears, your imagination, and control it on something simple, a chord or an octave, you know, pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, and fortissimo. Perhaps a long one, or perhaps you do it short if you want to release. The idea of invisible playing, and then just sounding is a good one. And lastly, the jackhammer practice method as a way of developing a very clear, bright sort of touch without a great deal of force. Well, not force, without a great deal of tension. Okay, I hope those are useful and look forward to any debate, discussion in the comments below. All the best. Bye.